In the age of emperors and heresies, when the church trembled under the weight of falsehood and fear, a solitary voice rose from the northern mountains. Not a warrior of sword and shield, but of scripture and truth. He was sent not to conquer by force, but to stand like a pillar against the winds of deceit. This is the story of Saint Eusebius of Vercelli, the bishop who defied emperors, who walked through exile and fire, and whose light still burns in the shadowed halls of time. Step now into the legend of a man forged by truth and chosen by heaven. Chapter 1. The Chosen Bishop of the Mountains. Long before the name of Vercelli would echo through the halls of church history, before the councils and the creeds, before exile and miracles, there was a young man named Eusebius. He was born in Sardinia, an island wild with wind and sea. But destiny soon pulled him to Rome, the beating heart of an empire and the cradle of a church that still bore the marks of martyrs. There, among scholars and priests, Eusebius grew in wisdom and stature. He was not loud nor hungry for power, but quiet, deliberate, and filled with an uncommon fire for the truth. The Scriptures were his companions, the poor his friends, and Christ his model. Rome taught him discipline, the Spirit taught him courage. In the year 345, a new diocese was carved from the northern reaches of Italy, a place untouched by episcopal leadership, nestled at the foot of the Alps. Vercelli, rugged, Roman, and restless. And when the time came to choose its first bishop, the voice of the church called upon Eusebius. He did not seek the mitre. He did not chase authority. But when the will of God was made clear, Eusebius obeyed. He entered the city not like a prince, but like a shepherd. He walked its cobbled streets, blessed its homes, and listened to the heartbeat of its people. But more than that, he brought with him a vision unlike any the West had seen. Drawing inspiration from the East, from the monastic traditions of Egypt and Syria, he formed a community of priests who lived with him, not scattered in private dwellings, but united under one roof, bound by prayer, humility, and shared purpose. This was no bishop's palace. It was a house of holiness. The clergy prayed together, studied together, served together. The people saw in their bishop not a distant lord, but a living example of the gospel. This model of life would echo across centuries. Saint Ambrose of Milan, Saint Augustine of Hippo, they would look to Vercelli as a beacon of reform, a place where the office of bishop was fused with the soul of a monk. Yet even as the fires of faith warmed the hearts of the faithful, shadows stirred beyond the city walls. A storm was rising in the empire. The peace Constantine had brokered after centuries of persecution was beginning to fracture. And within the church itself, a question emerged that would shake its foundations. Was Christ truly divine, of one substance with the Father, or something less? The heresy of Arius spread like smoke, subtle, poisonous, and deadly. Bishops argued. Emperors intervened. Councils were summoned. And the church stood on the edge of a dangerous precipice. Eusebius, still young in his episcopate, stood at the center of the whirlwind. But the man who had crossed mountains to shepherd Vercelli would not now retreat from the coming fire. He had been chosen not only for a city, but for a battle. And that battle was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Battle for Christ. The wind had shifted in the empire. The days of open persecution had passed, but a new danger had crept into the heart of the church. A war not fought with swords, but with words. It came not from pagans, but from within. The Arian heresy. At its core, Arianism denied that Jesus Christ was fully God, claiming he was a created being lesser than the Father. It was a lie that dressed itself in reason, but it tore at the very foundation of Christian faith. If Christ was not divine, then the cross had no power, and salvation itself was undone. Eusebius, bishop of a remote city in the northern hills, knew this truth with the certainty of fire. Christ was not merely a prophet, not merely anointed. He was God from God, light from light, true God from true God. And he would stake his life on that truth. In 355, Emperor Constantius II summoned a council in Milan. It was not a council of dialogue, but of pressure. The emperor wanted the bishops to sign a condemnation of Athanasius of Alexandria, the boldest defender of Nicene orthodoxy. Many bishops, fearful or confused, submitted. But Eusebius would not bend. When the scroll was brought before him, he stood tall in the hall, his voice calm but resolute. "We cannot condemn a man who has defended the faith," he declared. "Let us first affirm the Creed of Nicaea, and then speak of any accusation." The silence that followed was like the edge of a blade. He had defied the emperor, and in doing so, he joined a long line of saints who had chosen truth over safety. Soldiers seized him. He was dragged from the council and sent into exile, first to Scythopolis, where the air was thick and foreign. There, the local Arian bishop treated him with cruelty and contempt. Then to Cappadocia, among sharp rocks and cold silence. Then farther still, to the desolate lands of Upper Egypt, where exile became a kind of living death. Years passed. He was beaten, spat upon, starved, forbidden to write or speak. But they could not silence the truth within him. He prayed in secret. He fasted by choice. And in that quiet suffering, something holy grew. The people of Vercelli mourned their absent shepherd. Letters were smuggled across the empire, bearing news of his condition. Some whispered that he had died. Others claimed miracles had occurred in his presence. There is a tale told by travelers of a Roman guard struck by fever in the Egyptian heat. When death seemed near, Eusebius, still bruised and in chains, laid a hand on the soldier's brow and whispered the name of Christ. The fever broke before dawn. Even in exile, his faith healed. Even in chains, he stood free. This was no ordinary bishop. He was a warrior of the incarnate Word, and though cast into the wilderness, his spirit burned brighter than ever. And while emperors played their games of power, heaven watched. For in the depths of his suffering, Eusebius was being refined like gold in fire, and the fire was not done with him yet. Chapter 3. The Return and the Fire. Years had passed since Eusebius had walked free. He had aged in exile, not just in body, but in soul, hardened by persecution, tempered by silence, purified by suffering. But empires rise and fall. The iron grip of Constantius loosened with his death, and the tide of favor shifted. When Julian the Apostate took the throne, he sought to humiliate the church by releasing its imprisoned bishops. What the emperor meant for mockery, God used for triumph. Eusebius stepped once more onto the soil of Italy, not as a broken man, but as a flame rekindled. The road home was long. He traveled from Egypt through Antioch, then westward toward Vercelli. Wherever he went, Christians gathered to see him. This bishop who had defied an emperor and survived. They touched his robes, kissed his hands, begged for his prayers. He said little, but in his eyes burned something that could not be quenched. He did not return to Vercelli immediately. First, he went to Alexandria, then to Antioch, then to the synods of the East. He carried with him not only scars, but a mission to heal the torn fabric of the church. The East and the West had grown distant. Councils had divided bishops. Accusations had replaced brotherhood. Eusebius knew the wounds ran deep, but he also knew that unity in truth was possible. He met with Hilary of Poitiers, another confessor of the faith, another exile returned. Together, they worked to reconcile the Eastern bishops who had been led astray, drawing them back to the Nicene Creed, not with threats, but with patience, clarity, and the unwavering light of truth. When at last Eusebius returned to Vercelli, the city welcomed him like a father from the dead. People poured into the streets. Bells rang. Torches lit the night. Some wept. Others sang. And in the cathedral, long silent, his voice rose again in prayer. He did not rebuild his own honor. He rebuilt the faith of his people. He resumed his rule as bishop, not with severity, but with mercy. He spoke often of forgiveness, of endurance, of the cost of truth. He knew the temptation to bitterness, to pride. But he chose peace. And yet, even then, miracles followed him like shadows. It is said that once, when barbarians approached the region, threatening to plunder the city, Eusebius climbed the city walls and stretched out his hands toward the mountains. All night he prayed, motionless. At dawn, a dense fog rolled in from the Alps, shrouding the city. The invaders lost their way and turned back, confused and blind. The people declared that God had protected them through their bishop's intercession. Another story tells of a plague that struck a nearby village. Eusebius went alone, against all warnings, and ministered to the sick. None of his priests dared follow. But days later, when he returned unscathed, the village had been healed. Whether history or holy legend, these tales live on not to glorify a man, but to reveal the power of a soul fully surrendered to Christ. Eusebius had become more than a bishop. He was a living bridge between East and West, between suffering and joy, between heaven and earth. But his mission was not yet over. There was still a final chapter to be written, one not of fire or battle, but of the quiet legacy that only saints leave behind. Chapter 4. The Light That Endures. Eusebius had fought his battles. He had stood before emperors, defied councils, and endured the deserts of exile. He had returned not to reclaim honor, but to restore peace. And in the quiet years that followed, he gave his people a final, enduring gift, the witness of a life wholly given to Christ. He did not write volumes of theology. He did not seek titles or recognition. What he left was more subtle, more powerful, a new model of bishop, one who prays with his people, who suffers with the church, and who leads not from a throne, but from a cross. As the years drew to a close, Eusebius became a figure of silent authority. Young priests came to him for counsel. Bishops traveled great distances to hear him speak. When disputes arose, his word carried weight not because of power, but because of purity. He spoke little of his exile. He did not recall the beatings, the chains, the cold floors where he had slept. But his eyes, deep and steady, told of a soul that had walked through fire and emerged tempered, unshakable. One day, not long after celebrating the feast of Easter, Eusebius fell ill. The people of Vercelli sensed it before he spoke it. They gathered at the cathedral, lighting candles, singing psalms, keeping vigil as word spread that their shepherd was preparing for his final journey. It is said that in his last moments, he asked for silence. Not chants, not lamentation, just silence. Then, as those around him knelt, he lifted his hand in blessing, traced the sign of the cross in the air, and whispered, "Christ is light. Christ is all." And then he passed into glory. He died around the year 371, but his story did not end there. His tomb became a place of pilgrimage. Miracles were reported, healings, conversions, visions. A woman who had lost her sight claimed it was restored after praying at his grave. A child who had fallen into the river was pulled out unharmed after his mother cried out to the saint of Vercelli. But more than miracles, it was the memory of his courage, his humility, his unwavering defense of the truth that kept his name alive. The Church would later recognize him officially as a saint and confessor, one of the great defenders of the Nicene faith. His legacy would shape not just Vercelli, but the very character of the episcopate in the West. Today, when bishops stand against injustice, when pastors choose the narrow road of truth over the easy road of compromise, the spirit of Eusebius stirs again. His light, kindled in the shadows of heresy and persecution, still burns, quiet, steady, and eternal. Saint Eusebius of Vercelli did not seek greatness. He sought Christ, and in finding him, he became a light for all who walk the path of faith. The echo of a saint. The life of Saint Eusebius of Vercelli is not just a chapter in history. It is a torch passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. His courage, his silence, his steadfast faith remind us that the truth is worth every sacrifice, and that holiness often shines brightest in exile, in prayer, and in humble service. May his witness inspire us to stand firm, to walk in light, and to build the Church not with power, but with love. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of a true servant of Christ. If this story has touched your heart, we invite you to explore more stories of faith and courage on our channel. Thank you for watching our videos, and may peace be with you always.